Clint. Jason London, Pink. Dina Martin DeLucia, Siobhan. Matthew McConaugheys, Wooderson. Catherine Avril Morris, Julie. Parker Posey, Darla. Esteban Powell, Carl. Anthony Rapp, Tony. Marissa Ribisi, Cynthia. Michelle Burke Thomas, Jody. Mark Vandermeulen, Tommy. Wiley Wiggins, Mitch. Introduction. If I ever start referring to these as the best years of my life, remind me to kill myself. In 2011, Richard Linklater lost everything. From September to October of that year, the most destructive wildfire in the history of Texas burned through the middle of the state. Strong winds from Tropical Storm Lee had merged 3 separate fires into one massive blaze that ripped through the small historic town of Bastrop, nearly 30 minutes southeast of Austin. Bastrop State Park, a lush, 6,600-acre area teeming with pine trees, white-tailed deer, and armadillos, was reduced to a charred wasteland. The only sign of life was the sound of katydids singing from somewhere beyond the billowing smoke. 2 people were killed, and more than 1,600 homes were reduced to ash, including the one that belonged to the writer-director of Dazed and Confused. Linklater and his family were unharmed, but nearly everything he owned was destroyed. Not long after Dazed was released, he bought a 38-acre piece of land in Bastrop and slowly built a compound, doing some of the construction himself. It featured a sports field, tennis court, and almost every artifact he'd amassed from his entire career as a filmmaker. Personal prints of his films, early drafts of scripts, production materials, publicity documents, and a museum's worth of memorabilia that included the famous Kiss statues from Dazed. Just a few years before, he'd hosted a 10-year reunion party for Dazed here, and the place was haunted with memories of the cast just hanging out. Matthew McConaughey had hit a home run in the trees. Parker Posey swam in the pool. Dina Martin got in trouble for racing around the grounds in one of Linklater's go-karts. Those go-karts were now melted to the ground. Everything went up in flames. Linklater's friend and collaborator Ethan Hawke recalled. 30 years of work. He lost everything. And when I called him to say how sorry I was, he was already thinking about how grateful he was for the fire for teaching him not to be materialistic. This makes him sound like Saint Rick. He's not. He's his own mysterious entity. After hours of interviews and visits with Linklater, who was unfailingly patient and cooperative as I persistently asked him to revisit an experience that brought back unwelcome memories, I agree that Linklater is a bit of a mystery. Even his friends characterize him as someone who is hard to get close to. Still, Hawke's story captures a fundamental contradiction about the director. He's the master of exploring the concept of nostalgia in his films, but he often seems actively intellectually opposed to the very idea of it. He makes period pieces that vividly capture bygone eras and romantic tributes to childhood and early adulthood. The most important theme of his work is the passing of time, and yet, when his entire history was swallowed by a fire, he seemed determined not to dwell on the loss. Obviously, I draw a lot of creative inspiration from the past, what people would call nostalgia, says Linklater, who is surrounded by classic movie posters in his office in Northeast Austin. But when I was making Dazed, I was thinking about how nostalgia can be a dangerous thing. People are nostalgic for times that never fucking existed. When you think about the past, you have to try to remember what was really going on. When people say, "Oh, those were the good times," I always have to remind them, no, that time sucked. This was the surprising goal behind Dazed and Confused. He wanted to show how much the 70s sucked. As a thoughtful teenager growing up in the East Texas town of Huntsville in the late 1970s, Linklater was disgusted by adults' nostalgia for the 1960s. "What a great time," he says, laughing. "Rioting, war, assassinations." But his generation ended up having the same feelings about the 1970s. That's just the way nostalgia works. It is not a collection of memories, but a reinvention of memory itself. It's misremembering your own life on purpose. Linklater intuitively distrusted that type of sunny revisionist thinking, even when he was too young to fully understand it.